Hello there, Year 12. This video is going to be about question B, feedback. What's going to happen is you're going to have 4 targets displayed on the side with examples of how you would do those things. What you need to do is watch the whole video and then make a decision about which target is most relevant for you. The first target you might choose is about making your introduction more focused. The way you can do that is make sure it's focused on the debate within the sources. Let's look at an example here. We've got a sentence which says sources 4 and 6 clearly argue that the result of the election was not a full conclusion. This shows the candidate knows what the argument of the sources is before they launch into the paragraph. Similarly, they also introduce source 5, but they specifically say actually source 5 disagrees with source 4 and 6. So therefore the examiner is aware that they know what they're doing in terms of the debate and where their essay is going. Finally, and a lot of people failed to do this, is at the end of this introduction, we've got a really good judgment at the end, okay? A judgment using the sources to explain which way the candidate's going to go in the essay. You need to do these things. You need to ensure that you talk about the sources, and you also need to show the direction that your essay is going in. Show your opinion about which factor or which side of the argument you're going to choose. So target 1 is to introduce the debate of the sources in my introduction, and also introduce which side of the argument I'm going to choose to argue for in my essay. This means that we're going to have analysis from the introduction through the paragraphs and finally tying it all together in the conclusion. The second target is going to be about organisation of your essays. Now, there were a lot of improvements in the essays this week in terms of moving away from talking about the sources in order. However, let's get even better at that. Let's aim for that A star grade by actually making our themes not based around the sources and whether they disagree or agree, but around themes. Now, what I mean by themes is you're choosing themes where you disagree or agree. So, for example, in this essay, we've got clear themes. Secondly, another factor was poor Conservative policies and the campaign that they built up. The theme here, therefore, of this whole paragraph is about the poor campaign of the Conservative Party. Now, what's really good is if you choose a theme rather than a source, it means that you're automatically going to be able to cross-reference within that paragraph without much trouble, because we can find points about source 4 and source 6 in this particular paragraph, because both sources provide evidence that it was bad Conservative electioneering. Now, the problem was when you do it by source is that sometimes if you do a paragraph about source 4 and source 6, for example, actually what people ended up doing was repeating the same point in those 2 paragraphs. If you organise your paragraphs by theme, that means that you can look at both sources within that same paragraph and therefore prevent yourself from repeating what you've said before. So this is the next target, target 2, organise my paragraph by theme and not by the sources. This target is probably going to be chosen by the majority of people sitting in this room. So think carefully, have you done this or not? The next target you might have is making sure your judgment is going to be clear throughout the essays and in your paragraph, because a lot of people, well, they had some really good paragraphs, so there's no judgment. You're not making sure that analysis is flowing through your essay. Now, let's look at this example. This candidate has decided to write convincingly, if you see it here, writing that those sources have really convincingly supported the notion that electioneering played a part. That clearly identifies which way the candidate is going with their answer. They clearly think, actually, these short-term impacts, the electioneering is going to be crucial. And by just signifying that, by saying, actually, these sources convincingly support the notion, that's really giving the examiner indication of what that candidate thinks and that judgment that's so crucial. You should be doing that if you're not already. You should be putting a line of judgments at the end of each paragraph. So the third target, therefore, is to add a sentence of judgment at the end of each paragraph, so your analysis flows throughout the essay. This will improve not only your AO1 score for the analysis throughout the essay, but also your AO2, because you're making a judgment how convincing the evidence is in that source is. One thing to remember, though, is try not to write down that a source is particularly convincing when it's going to go against the argument you're going for. So don't write under each of your judgments that a source is convincing, because actually you want to disprove in some cases that it isn't. The final factor that you might choose is about your conclusion. Now, in AO2 it says, one of the descriptors for level 4 is reaches and sustains a conclusion based on the discriminating use of the evidence. Now, one way you can do that is through the judgment in those final sentences of the paragraphs that I've just discussed, but also in your conclusion. Now, what this conclusion has done is it brought together all the sources really well, so it's explained which side of the argument each source came down on, but also what else has happened is they've used the evidence and used the strength from the sources to explain where their conclusion or what decision that conclusion has come to. So, for example, it's shown the fact that in source 6, even a leading Labour MP was confident on his victory suggests right up into the day of the election, no one could be sure as to who would win. So it's used the evidence from the sources to back up its own points, and it's referred to the strength as well of each of those sources. That's what you should be doing in your conclusion. Therefore, the final target is to show how you've been using the evidence discriminatingly from the sources in your conclusion. So here are the 4 targets you could choose. Number 1, introduce the sources in my own opinion in my introduction. Target 2 was to organise your paragraphs by theme, not by source. Target 3 was to make a strong judgment at the end of each paragraph to keep your analysis clear throughout your essay. And target 4 was to show how the sources have led to your judgment in the conclusion and use them discriminatingly.